stars up above, so far away we only see their light, long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. יש כוכבים שאורם מגיע ארצה רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ואינם. יש אנשים שסביב זכרם מאיר כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. We remember. We remember.
I'm crying already. Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Susan Nannis, and I'm so thrilled to be here with my guest, Carolyn Siegel, for a very special Yom HaShoah program. Welcome, Carolyn. So nice to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi Nannis. It's an absolute honor to be here with you in the Wilshire Boulevard congregation. Thank you.
So you're welcome. I got this very interesting email from Carolyn about a new project that she created all on her own that is launching today. And she is what she told me is a new term I never heard, 3G, a third generation Holocaust survivor, a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. And she created this amazing online gallery of stories. And why don't you tell us a little bit about them, Carolyn? What is it? And then how did you decide to create it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the project is called If You Heard What I Heard. And the thinking behind it is, if you heard what I heard, you would never forget. And it's meant to capture the stories of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors like me, the last generation to hear these stories firsthand. Not that long ago, about a year ago, I had been watching a news report of a synagogue right by the Grove that had been graffitied. And it was like the 5th or 6th report I had read or seen in the past year. And I was so upset by having seen this report and just feeling that these incidents were becoming more prevalent. And I turned off the news and said, I'm just going to look at some family photos and take a minute. And I found a photo of my great-grandparents who were killed in the Holocaust. And that's the same photo that I found when I was 8 years old, where my grandfather said, the Nazis murdered my family. And I remember being hit in that moment with just like a flood of all these different experiences throughout my life, of these flashbacks of my grandfather, telling me at the same time saying the Nazis murdered my family, at the same time saying it's the job of your generation to make sure the world doesn't forget. And I thought about that promise to him. And I thought about the fact that my kids will never get to hear what I heard. And I thought about a family friend of ours in Connecticut, their daughter Haley, when she was 10, was reading Number the Stars and called me and said, I want to know about the Holocaust. And I shared my story with her, and my story became her story, and it resonated with her in a very different way than her reading about it in a book, because she was hearing it from me, someone she could identify with or someone that she was closer to. So I thought about like all of these experiences, and I said, I have to do something. And I took a look at sort of what was out there for today, and had read a statistic that 70% of today's youth does not know that the Holocaust happened, which was mind-blowing and so alarming. And when I looked at that and I said, well, what tools exist to educate them about the Holocaust? And, the truth is I have so much respect for the Shoah Foundation, and thank God Steven Spielberg captured all of those amazing stories. Thank God we have that. But in the world we live in today, is somebody going to have the patience to, go watch a 2+ hour interview that was filmed 20 years ago of, an 80-year-old speaking at the time? But you know what? Maybe if you saw or heard about my story on social media, the tools that we have today, and you saw a shorter clip of that, maybe you would be inspired to go watch the longer form video and hear it from a survivor themselves. So the way I really see this project is a conduit to really the larger education and the amazing work that's already been done to preserve memory. But my hope is that through this project, we can preserve memory in a way that's relevant for today.
So what the project is a gallery of different 3Gs, of different, their millennial grandchildren who heard the stories telling their grandparents' stories. Yeah. So how did you select the people in your gallery?
Yeah, so these are individual interviews that ranged from 15 to 30 minutes. I didn't want them to be longer than 30 minutes. And when this project started, I set out on this journey about 11 months ago. It took me a little bit to get all the pieces in place and say, can I really do this? And then I put a Facebook post up and said, do I know anyone that's the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors? Now, I knew that I knew people that were, in my network that were grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. I grew up going to Temple Emmanuel Day School in Milken, so I grew up with other 3Gs. But I didn't know who would be interested in sharing their story. And I was really surprised by the response. I think within 24 hours, I had like 12 people respond. Actually, among the very first to respond was a very good friend of mine, Aaron Aftergood, who's the grandson of 2 Holocaust survivors. And he responded. I think he was like the first person to respond. And my Camp Alonim community was right there. I mean, I was very surprised at how quickly I received responses from 2 people that were in my network that I had gone to camp with and was close to, but I didn't realize that they were grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. One of them is Dina Grimshaw, and she's watching tonight. Hi, Dina. And Adam Feldman. And, I have to say, in capturing these stories, you don't know when you set out on something like this, like how it's going to work out. And I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a marketing executive. So I know how to tell a story. I don't know how to tell a story through film. So this was a real journey and learning curve for me. But, I did 5 test round interviews early on. And once I did those test round interviews, I knew I had to keep going. There was something here.
So how did you finance this project? I'm curious. Did you get donations? Did you pay for it yourself? How did it happen?
Yeah, there was no financing behind this project. So it literally was me with, again, using the digital tools that we have today. It was me with a tripod. I think I spent like $20 on a tripod on Amazon. I did spend like $100 on a light and a microphone and a stand. And to be honest, I would have been fine with just the tripod because none of those things ended up actually working. And using Google Hangouts. And so what would happen is I would drop off the tripod to the participant's house. I have a few on the East Coast that thankfully they all had tripods, so I didn't have to worry about that. And walk them through like setting it up. I had put together like a pre-production packet. I'm very fortunate. I have a very good family friend of ours who is a producer, works in the film industry, and was able to guide me and sort of say, okay, like you need to put together a pre-production packet and here's what that looks like, and you should outline instructions and that kind of thing. So I feel very lucky to have had his support. His name is Zach Unterman. And also the support, again, of my All-In community stepped right up. So Adam Feldman put me in touch with Teal Canaday, who is also a producer in the industry, who was very helpful and, said, have you thought about this, or have you tried this, or, that type of thing. But Zach really Zach was the very first person I spoke to about this project. And he really helped me sort of come at it, from the angle that was aligned with the vision I had for this project. This is not like a typical, like something you would see a foundation or a museum put together. I mean, this is really just like me working with my friends on getting our stories out there. And I think that comes across. And it's very professionally done. Oh,
and what would you say, did they have, first of all, what was the age range of the different participants, the oldest to the youngest? What was that?
Oh man, the oldest, I don't know, because we're all around the same age. So actually interesting, we have a mother-daughter team that has participated in this. So Molly Stern, her grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and Molly's dad, Andrew, was actually born in a ghetto in Budapest. So Molly's daughter, Vivian, was 15. So to answer your question about the youngest participant, Vivian was 15 when we filmed her interview. And it's amazing to hear just like the differences in their experiences, and they're part of the same family, their mother, daughter. But what Molly heard was so different, and her experience and her takeaways from it was so different from what Vivian's are. And that was really emotional and meaningful for me to capture that.
And what would you say, did each one were the, let's say, the intentions or the desire to tell the story, did they come from different places? Or did these 3Gs feel this obligation to their grandparents? Was that universal? Was it all the same, or did they have different motivations?
No, they were all very, very proud to share their stories. I think that for a lot of us, we grow up with this sense of responsibility and this weight of like, it's our job to carry this forward. What's interesting is that my friend Cameron is Catholic, and she responded right away. And she said, I am the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. And I was like, wait, what? I was a little confused at first because I had no idea. And it was really interesting because in her interview, she actually shares, how important it was for her to make sure that her grandmother's story was told. And I think that there's a sense of legacy there, right, that we all carry when you have a grandparent who went through a traumatic event. And especially, the trauma from the Holocaust. But I think the thing that surprised me most was going into this project, I really sort of expected to capture stories of survival. What I wasn't expecting to capture were these just unbelievable and inspiring stories of resilience. And I have to say that was my personal saving grace more times than I can count in this process. This was a very emotional process. And I remember, my parents and my friends would say to me, but Carolyn, you're capturing, like, these are stories of people who survived, you know, and thinking about that, it really, so many of the participants in this project say in their interviews, if they did it, I can do it, you know, and I really felt that way with this project. Like, I hit so many hurdles with this project, getting it off the ground. And anytime I hit a challenge with it, it was like, okay, just keep going. Why am I doing this? Is anything going to keep me from telling these stories? And the answer was always no. You know, nothing's going to keep me from doing this because their legacy is too important. Their stories are too important. What they went through is too important. So anytime I hit a roadblock with this project, either I had to refilm something, or the editing wasn't going well, or I had a conversation with a producer thinking like, can someone help me get this done because I don't know what I'm doing, and that didn't go well, you know, I just said, I'm going to keep doing it. If they could get through what they got through, this is nothing, and I owe it to them to tell their story.
I think every Holocaust story is a story of survivor story. It's a story of a miracle, because it's a series of miracles that allowed people to survive. It was partly their own, it wasn't just their abilities, it was the people who helped them, or chance, or luck, or circumstance. And I also know from my own experience with Holocaust survivors that the most important thing for them is to make sure that their stories are told, and that the people that they lost do not just fade into oblivion, but that there's, you know, that we acknowledge, remember, and tell their stories. And what you're doing is carrying on and fulfilling their dream, their most deepest dream, to make sure that these stories didn't die with their loved ones, and doesn't die with them, but will continue. So I think we're going to see two excerpts from these stories. And the first one is Karen, correct? So we're going to watch Karen first, just a few 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll talk about Karen, and then we'll see another one.
Yeah.
My name is Karen Gonen. If you heard what I heard, you would never forget. I am the grandchild of 2 Holocaust survivors, Shlomo Alexander Lazarovich and Shlime Charlotte Lazarovich. I'll be sharing my grandmother's story today. Her official Czech name was Charlotte Kaminer, that's her maiden name, Lazarovich. I knew her as Sarah, or Shlime, which was her Israeli Jewish name. So I used to call my grandmother Safta, which is grandmother in Hebrew. So my grandmother was born in the village of Jasina, which at the time was in Czechoslovakia. It was a larger village, lots of countryside, lots of hills, lots of smaller villages in the area. My grandmother, Shime, was one of 5. It was Aaron, the twins, Judah and Jacob. Then it was her and her baby sister, Muja. She was born in 1914, raised in an Orthodox home. They were a very close-knit family, not only with each other, but also with their cousins and other expanded family. They would see each other all the time on holidays. They would spend summers with each other, all together, just one big camp. When my grandmother was of age, she was actually betrothed to my grandfather, who lived in a village close by the name of Khus. That's where he was born, with his family of 13 siblings. They had gotten married, they had raised a family, they had a son and a daughter before the war began. So my grandparents had their little home and their little family, and they were very hardworking people. That's how they were both raised. They were those Jews that just refused to believe that there would ever be an issue or anti-Semitism. And even though they probably heard the rumors, they didn't believe that that would happen to them until the day that the Nazis came into the village and started it all. So the day that the Nazis arrived, from what I was told, they rounded up all the Jews and then they lined them up. So my grandparents stayed together with my grandmother's parents and the other siblings. And what they did is they lined them all up. My grandfather was separated immediately to go into the men's section, to the working camps. My grandmother and her younger sister, Ruja, were separated because they were young and they were able to work. The children went with the grandparents, my grandmother's parents. They were separated from there and taken away, never to be seen again. They had no idea that this would be the last time that they would see their parents, their siblings, and their children. In essence, there was also an older brother that was never seen again, and no one knows what happened to him. My grandmother and her youngest sister were taken to Dresdenstadt, and over there they had separated them into cabins, and they would work day and night. They would sleep on benches without a mattress. Eventually, my grandmother and her younger sister were moved to Auschwitz, and they were there, and it was quite the experience for them. They said that was the place where God did not exist. My grandmother had a hard time speaking about it because she was raised in an Orthodox home where they believed in God, they followed everything they were supposed to. And for them to come back to their belief and their faith took them years, because how could God allow this to happen to them? It was such a hopeless place for them where God didn't hear prayers. It didn't matter how much they cried, how much they felt they sacrificed. He wasn't there.
So tell us about Karen.
Yeah, so Karen is actually my cousin. And what's interesting is that her grandmother, Shlima, who she talks about, was my grandfather, Moses. They were first cousins. So when she talks about the extended family that they spent time with in Yasna, that was my grandfather's immediate family. And when we filmed that day, just talking about that, I mean, the two of us, we had to stop filming for like 2 or 3 minutes just to have a minute to acknowledge, how their family really was destroyed. My grandfather was the only surviving member of his immediate family. So when she talks about that they would spend time with their cousins, that was really hard for both of us because it's her family too, and what her family went through, they're my family. So that was tough. And Karen is the mother of 2 boys who are both around bar mitzvah age. One had his bar mitzvah already. The other one is expected to have his this year. And Karen talked about when her son Gabriel was born, how she all of a sudden had all of these fears that she never had before, but that it's part of her inherited trauma of being, a grandchild of survivors, that she thought about, okay, if God forbid, the Nazis come, I'm going to get my son and put him on my back on the carrier and get the cash that I have and go to Israel because that's the place that we're going to be safe. And she said, she talks about in her interview how she never had these fears before. So I think what's interesting about these interviews is that it's not just, here's what I heard, here's the story as it happened, but the latter part of every interview really deals with how does that impact you today? And what is your experience with it today? And it's been really interesting to hear that from all of the participants.
So now we're going to hear from Robert.
Yes.
To show us the gallery as you move over. This is what it looks like on the website. You can, scroll through and you can hear all of these different interviews, and we're going to hear Robert's grandparents' story.
My name is Robert Hendlish. If you heard what I heard, you would never forget. I am the grandson of 2 Holocaust survivors. Today I'll be sharing my grandfather's story. His name was Chaim Hendlish, also known as Charles Hendlish. My grandfather was born in Lodz, Poland, to a very religious family. He was the oldest of 4 children. And his father was a talit maker and seller, which is a prayer shawl in Judaism, was often on the road a lot to try to sell those items. So he would take care of his family. He was extremely close with his mother. He often told me about their struggles economically. They came from a very poor family. Often they went to bed hungry and could only have one really nice meal during the week. That was for Shabbat, Sabbath, on Friday night, where they would have meat and some wonderful items to eat. But they didn't have any meat throughout the week as well, just once on the Friday. And he told me a lot about the anti-Semitism that he grew up with as a kid and later as a young teen. How many times they would make fun of his curls and call him a dirty Jew, and how many times he was beaten physically. It's just really hard. It really stayed with him. He had such a tremendous hatred for Poland and what he went through, and hated it and his experience there in Lodz. One night in 1939, my grandfather's family got a knock on the door. And two SS men were waiting for my great-grandfather to come to the door. So he did, and they asked him to go with them. And he was like, what did I do? What are these charges? I didn't do anything. He said, you have to come with us now. So my grandfather, being the oldest, said, I'm going to go with you, Dad, and let me come with you. So they both went downstairs with the SS men. And my great-grandfather kept saying, why am I here? I didn't do anything wrong. The SS men were questioning him and saying, you have to come with us. You have to come with us now. And he refused to go. In a split moment, the SS man shot my great-grandfather in the head in front of my grandfather. And in a bit of rage, my grandfather tried to fight back against those SS men, and they beat him down. And for the rest of his life, he would have a little limp. And he carried this not only physical scar, but an emotional scar for the rest of his life, seeing his father killed in front of him. As time went on, eventually my grandfather and the rest of his family were sent to a ghetto called the Lodz Ghetto, where the Jews were placed in a very small area of the city and couldn't leave. So they lived in the ghetto in very, very harsh conditions. There wasn't a lot of food. People were living basically on top of each other. And my grandfather was about 18 years old at the time. So he was very, very lucky to have lots of energy and able to work long, long hours. And he was able to help the people in the ghetto with food distribution. That was his job in the ghetto. And that came with a lot of challenges. He had to see all the difficult situations that the people are in, and the desperate, desperate situations that people are in, and such hunger, and really getting desperate to do anything for food. So he had to see a lot, and that weight carried on again with him for the rest of his life as well, having to make really hard decisions about food distribution. So he was placed in a hard position, even though he was helping people, but having to make choiceless choices, as we have called it many times in the Jewish world. And I think this is something that he struggled with. Wow, did I make the right choices in the ghetto and throughout the war? I think that my grandfather made sure that now he was kind of the man of the family, and to make sure that they were taken care of and they had enough food. And he woke up earlier than 5 a.m. and didn't get back home till after 9 p.m. Doing this food distribution. So he made sure that he did his best to take care of his family. One day, my grandfather came back from his work in the ghetto and found that his family was gone. And it seemed that the apartment they lived in, the space that they lived in, was robbed and taken over, and the door was left open, and they were gone. he never saw them again.
So heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So tell us about, you call him Bobby. Tell us about him. Teacher, I believe, correct?
He is. So yeah, Bobby and I, he goes by Robert now, but I know him. I always call him Bobby. But we grew up together. We went to Milken together, and he is now a teacher at D. Toledo High School, and he's also taught at Milken. He, he talks about in his interview how the fact that his grandparents, his grandfather is a Holocaust survivor, that really influenced him, because for him today, to teach Jewish youth is really important for him to know that he is part of shaping the next generation that will carry on this legacy. That's really important for him. And it's one of my favorite parts of his interview is when he shares, his work as a teacher and how important it is, for us to carry on the legacy. He's a dad now. He has a little girl, and he talks about how important it is, for her to know her heritage one day as well.
And some of the other participants, one's a rabbi, correct?
Yes. So Jeremy Ruberg is a rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Cloister, New Jersey. And he and I taught Sunday school together way back when in Greenwich, Connecticut. But he talks about his grandfather, Albert Brunn, who, thank God, is still alive. He's 97 years old. And Jeremy talks about how Albert was a Berlin Jew, metropolitan, urban Jew. And his family was very fortunate in that they were able to get out. So their turning point for them was Kristallnacht. They lived through Kristallnacht and witnessed that. And Jeremy talks about how the night of Kristallnacht, what his grandfather went through and how terrifying that was. And his grandfather was about 15 at the time, and he was able to get out on Germany on the Kinder transport as sort of like a counselor for the other younger children. And that's how he survived.
So tonight is Erev, or this is the beginning of Yom HaShoah, and we're going to take a moment now from this program to do some actual prayers and memory. And we're going to start with lighting a candle, a Yortzeit candle, for these grandparents and for the 6 million. So we're each going to light one. And in a moment, cantor Kareth Spencer Shapiro is going to sing a song based on a beautiful poem by Hannah Senesh, who was a young woman who escaped from Hungary during the war and went to Israel, Palestine at the time, and then returned to spy for Israel and was captured and killed. But she wrote many beautiful poems, and this is one that Cantor Shapiro is going to sing, and I just want to read the lyrics first. It's called Blessed is the Match. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with the strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Cantor Shapiro singing Blessed is the Match.
Ashrei Hagafrur, blessed is the match. In this song, we pray for the souls of those whose flame was put out too soon. We also pray that our flames, as a remembrance, continue to burn bright.
Rachamim. It is a prayer that we say at every Yisker service. It is a prayer asking God to take the souls of those who have departed and enfold them in these beautiful metaphorical wings and give them rest and succor and peace. But there's a special El Molei Rachamim for the victims of the Holocaust that we're going to hear in a moment, but I'm going to read you the translation first. Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6 million brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. Amen. We now hear Cantor Gurney chant this beautiful El Molei Rachamim.
El Molei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanefei HaShechinah, B'mahalot Kedoshim Utorim, Kezohar Arakia, Kezohar Arakia, Mazirim, Lenishmo. אחינו ואחיותינו שנהרגו ושנשחטו ונשרפו חיים על קידוש השם בעבור שכולנו כל בני ישראל מתייחדים עם זכרם הקדוש ומתפללים ביד על יד נשמותיהם. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, פעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו ליורמים ישרור בישרור החיים את נשמתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר
It's the obligation not just of the grandchildren or the descendants of Holocaust victims or Holocaust survivors to remember. It is the obligation of every Jew to remember and to honor their memories by making sure it never happens again to our people and fighting against any kind of genocide in the world. Because just as we were slaves in the land of Egypt, we were slaves in the Holocaust. We were victims. They are us, we are them, and we remember them, and we will never forget. And we say Kaddish in their memory now. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Yoma divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chaye chon u'v'yome chon, u'v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kari v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam omei omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei l'kudesha brichu. Le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, damiram v'yama v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom bimramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. May God bring peace to us and all Israel. And let us say, Amen. So, Carolyn, we are going to hear from some other people, but I want to hear from you a little bit about your story and what you feel. I'm going to hear what is the biggest lesson for you? What propels you now carrying that burden and carrying that story with you?
Yeah. Well, to answer your first question about my story, it's interesting. You know, I think the best way to sort of talk about it is my grandfather lost his whole family. He basically, what happened was he enlisted in the Polish army because he could see that things were getting really bad. And he did that sort of ahead of right before, September of 1939 in Poland. And he did that as a way of maybe I can offer some protection to my family if I'm already in the army. And then things, Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, and he and his brother were sent to Poznan for training and left behind at that point his parents. He had two older sisters, and his sister named her was married, and she had a little boy, my grandfather's nephew. So the last time, I have such a hard time talking about this. The last time my grandfather ever saw his nephew was 1 year old, and my grandfather survived the Holocaust by being in the army because he was in the Polish army. The Polish army was absorbed by the Russian army, and he was able to survive that way. But as soon as he went back to Poland, right after the war in 1945, end of 1945, he got back to Stanislaw, Poland, and he described this neighbor that it's someone he had known before the war who had worked in a factory, just, you know, like we all have acquaintances, the person you see at the grocery store, the person you see at the bank. This was someone that he knew that, you know, was just a neighbor of his. When my grandfather got back to Stanislaw, this man started just saying all kinds of anti-Semitic things towards him, called him a dirty Jew, just terrible things. And, you know, I think at that point was like, okay, like, say what you're going to say to me. I'm going to find my family. Like, where's my family? And he ran into a neighbor, and the neighbor told him that his parents were marched to a forest and forced to dig their own graves and shot. And the neighbor told him that his sisters and his nephew were sent to Belzec concentration camp. And so my grandfather's nephew, from the records that we have and everything we've been able to find out, his nephew was about 5 years old when he was murdered. And my grandfather had filled out testimonies on behalf of his family there at Yad Vashem. He filled those out, I think, sometime in 1957. And it's really, really tough for me to look at Clara, my namesake, and it really just tears me apart to look at his nephew. It's really tough.
So this project is really your commitment to your family, I would say.
It's honestly more than anything, and I get choked up talking about this too. My grandfather made me promise. It is the job of your generation to make sure you don't forget. And it's like silly now to talk about. I like remember at the time I was like 8 years old when he sang this to me for the first time. And then I heard it like throughout my life from there on out. And I remember at the time, like, you're a kid, you know, you don't think about the future. You're like, whatever, I want to go play with my friends. And I want, you know, I'm at school and whatever. And I remember thinking, well, Spielberg's like doing this, we'll be fine. Like, I don't need to worry about this. And it's amazing that here we are 30 years later. And again, thank God we have those testimonies captured, you know, for all time. Thank God we have that. I'll say it like over and over, but there's something missing for today. And so my hope is that, you know, this project can be the relevancy that we need for today so that we can all make good on that promise to every survivor. You know, I spoke to my grandparents, some very dear friends of theirs who are also Holocaust survivors, and Regina is still alive. Her husband, Al, passed away a few years ago. And Regina said to me today, with so much emotion, it was like my grandparents saying it to myself. She said, thank you so much for doing this.
So I thank you too. I thank you. And we all thank you. And, okay, we're both crying here. So we're going to conclude with 3 excerpts of 3 other participants talking about how their grandparents' stories changed them or affected them or shaped them, shaped who they are or who they are becoming. So we're going to start with Dina.
Yes. And hi, Dina. I know you're watching.
One thing that I always remembered in life growing up was that.
Sorry, I got to share screen. Sorry. Technical difficulties on my end, guys. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Here we go. All right.
Whenever things got really difficult or I was stressed out or there was something happening in my life, my grandmother always told me something that helped her get through was the saying, this too shall pass. So whenever things get difficult in my own life as a mom, and I see my kids, and I try to teach them right from wrong and how to love each other and love our family, I tell myself that no matter how hard things get, it's not as hard as what she went through. And if she could do it, I can definitely do it. And whatever moment I'm in right now, it'll pass. Things can only get better. As a teacher.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Dina. And now we're going to hear from Vivian. This was the youngest participant. She was 15 years old
Yes.
when she was videoed. So we're going to
Yes.
hear.
She just turned 16 not that long ago. So
Quite wise.
she had some really incredible insights, wise beyond her years for sure. So let's see. I'm going to skip ahead.
My name is James, so I think just that very, very important to my grandfather to know that his grandchildren and his children and his future great-grandchildren will know that they, one, should be proud to be Jewish, and two, that they are proud that they are survivors, that because they were able to survive, that him and his family were able to survive, that we are here today. And so there's this, it's so important for us to know how special it is that we are all Jewish, how special it is that we come from this family line. And every time we go over there for Shabbat, we always he talks about the Parsha, he'll ask us questions. I think that he's very involved in how we know that we're special because we're part of the Jewish religion, and we're special because we come from such a awful, horrible event, but that we were able to survive, which means that it's in our blood to survive, which means that it is now our job to always survive, to push through whatever struggle comes. And I think that is really important to him. I think that.
So, yeah.
What a powerful message. It's in our blood to survive, and we must survive no matter how difficult.
Yeah.
And finally, Danielle.
Yes. Again, we're going to skip ahead here.
My name is keep going. So back to my grandmother, it is crucial that I know her story, that future generations know her story and the stories of others. She has dedicated the second half of her life to making sure that that is the case. She speaks every week at the Holocaust Museum, and she's on every board and has immortalized her family's stories on tape. Something I do.
Again, very important message to continue to tell the story. Carolyn, you have created something extraordinary. I don't even know if you realize how wonderful it is and how important it is. And I'm very proud of you to see what you have done and your generation. And it gives us all hope, not just, for the future and for the future Jews, for these beautiful young people who are making sure the story, holding the torch and telling the story and making sure that it's not forgotten. So I want to thank you so much for this project and for being with us on this Yom HaShoah evening.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor to, work with you and, sharing these stories tonight. And I really, really appreciate, everything you've done and all of your support of this project and the wonderful conversation we've had to raise awareness for this. Thank you so much.
And tell people where they can find this.
So all of these videos live on ifyouheardwhatiheard.com. There's also an Instagram page that you're welcome to check out, and we'll be posting content there frequently.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to conclude with a beautiful song of hope, again by Hannah Senesh, who was quite extraordinary, sung by cantor Lisa Peacott. So this will be the final piece of our program. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
By poet Hannah Senesh. She escaped Budapest to make her way to the land of Israel, only to return and to fight for the freedom of others. She sadly lost her life, but some of her poetry is the most celebrated in Israel. She wrote this poem as part of her walk to Caesarea, her appreciation of life and beauty and all of those self-affirming moments of God's presence here in the world. On Yom HaShoah, we not only remember those we lost, but we remember why it is that we fight for the will to live and to fight for the freedom of others. Eli, Eli. Eli,
now.